Funding for the following production is presented in part by the University Bookstore, serving the East Side as well as the university community. From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. For several years, Seattle pediatrician Dr. Melvin Morse has studied near-death experiences of children. It's a subject that can provoke deep discomfort among some of his colleagues and among those of us who shy away from the topics of death, the existence of a human soul, or the possibilities for what might lie ahead once our lives are over. Dr. Morse explores all of these subjects in his new book, Closer to the Light, Learning from the Near-Death Experiences of Children. Welcome to Upon Reflection.
Well, thank you very much.
What is a near-death experience?
A near-death experience is what happens to people who come to the point of clinical death and then are resuscitated by our medical technology. The reason we're hearing so much about these experiences now is because we've had the medical technology for the past 20 years to be able to resuscitate people whose hearts have stopped beating and they've stopped breathing spontaneously, which is what I call clinical death. And what these people tell us is that they get a glimpse into what the dying process is like. They say that at the time that it is thought that they are dead, when they are lying there with their pupils fixed and dilated and they seem to be dead, that they actually feel they are floating out of their physical body. They can hear what nurses and doctors are saying. They can see what's going on around their body. And then they enter into a world of darkness. Usually they feel they're going down a long tunnel, or maybe it's a dark passageway or something like that. And at the end of that passageway is a beautiful light. And it's not just some kind of spasm of the optic nerve, but it's a light that they associate with love and feelings of peace and release. One boy said to me, there was a lot of good things in that light.
You have had a number of the children that you've worked with in your studies draw pictures for you to try to describe with a drawing what their experiences was like. And we have a number of those pictures. Let's take a look at them and have you tell the story.
And I'll go through the near-death experience in sequence so you can get a better feeling from it from children who have drawn these pictures themselves. Now, this is a 10-year-old girl who nearly died of a diabetic coma at Seattle Children's Hospital. And what we are is we're looking down at her body. She felt that during the time that she was documented as being clinically dead, that she was floating on the ceiling. And we're looking down at her. We see her there with her pigtails. And then on the bottom of the picture there, you can see a doctor with a green mask who's attending her bedside. Now, I love this picture because people say to me, well, can't they kind of invent this stuff from TV or whatever? But you notice that there's no IV in her body. And I think that whenever I see somebody sick in a hospital on TV, they always have an IV. And I went back and I checked her medical records, and I discovered that, in fact, when she was resuscitated, they were not able to get an IV into her.
But you did draw the mask, and she's so much bigger than the doctor.
I think that's interesting, too. And then here is the tunnel that we're talking about. Now, this story is going to startle you, and I know you'll want to come back to it later, but I'll tell you now that this is a boy who at 9 months had a near-death experience. And he is remembering it several years later, and he draws a picture of the bottom left part of the screen there. You can see the dark tunnel, and then he is headed towards a brilliant and beautiful light, which is at the top of the screen. Here's another example of a tunnel. This is a boy who nearly died after having a tonsillectomy, and his heart stopped beating while he was in the operating room because of an anesthetic reaction. And again, you see this long tunnel and then the brilliant, in this case, a rainbow light. So there you have that long tunnel and then a brilliant light at the end of it. Many times children say they have spirit guides which help them to this light, to this heavenly realm. And this girl, who nearly died at a community swimming pool, she said that she was in the tunnel and it was all dark and she was scared. And then the figure on the left is a woman named Elizabeth who came to her and said, "I will help you." And when she came to take her hand, the tunnel became lit up with a brilliant light, and the two of them walked together to a place that she perceived was heaven. And here's an example of that heavenly realm. This is a 5-year-old girl who nearly died of bacterial meningitis. Now, I love this. I love the 5-year-old's vision of Jesus. It looks more like Santa Claus.
Or a snowman.
Exactly. But this is the Jesus of the red hat. She says that she went to heaven, that she talked with Jesus. There's 3 angels in the picture. And she said there was even dead people waiting to be reborn in this heavenly realm.
The detail in these pictures is just amazing.
It's incredible, you know, to see. So many times the children themselves can't really describe what's going on, but they're able to draw it better. Now, you know, Marcia, everybody is saying to me, well, these experiences are so religious, and the children are talking about sitting in Jesus' lap and such as that. Now, here's a 10-year-old girl who comes from a non-religious family background. She has no religious training at all. And notice the 3 figures on the left side, similar to the 3 figures we saw earlier, but she said to me that these 3 figures were doctors. I said, doctors? Well, if every child is saying they sat on Jesus' lap, I guess I would be a little suspicious, but I'd never heard of doctors before, so I said to her, well, how did you know they were doctors? Well, they were really tall, and they were all dressed in white, and they had light bulbs in their bodies. and this is this picture here shows this final stage of the near-death experience, the decision to return to the body. And she said that these doctors told her to press a button on a box at her bedside, that if she pressed the green button, she would never be with her family again. And she was frightened of that possibility. So she pressed the red button and returned to consciousness.
Now, looking at those pictures and reading some of the stories, you can't help but be struck by the similarities between what these children are describing in death and birth. The fact that that there's a floating quality when you're in the womb, there's the long tunnel, you come out to the light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And people such as Carl Sagan have speculated that near-death experiences are nothing more than some kind of reactivated birth memory. That, whenever we're stressed, we sort of take a symbolic trip back to the womb, and we just sort of wish that we were back in the womb, and that somehow that birth experience of going down a tunnel into a brilliant light is, the explanation for near-death experiences. As a pediatrician, I guess I'm not terribly convinced by that. First of all, when infants are born, they are not going down the vaginal canal with their eyes, looking straight at them. Actually, their head is flexed and they can't see anything. Their head is tucked in, and they are not looking down a dark tunnel. And nor is the bright, brilliant light of the birthing experience anything like the light that these children described. The testimony from these children is very clear. They feel that this light is a light of love and of warmth and a sense of unconditional love that they've never felt on this earth. I'm not convinced that coming out of the womb into the operating theater, being toweled off and handled roughly, and
slapped on your bottom,
right, and having your foot stuck, and and all these kinds of things would generate feelings of love and unconditional warmth and such as that in the infants.
It's one of the striking qualities of the near-death experience they describe is the fact that it's so hard for them to make the decision to come back off, and they come back out of a sense of responsibility to those around them. But the feeling is so pleasant, it was very hard for them to return.
I agree that that's just a really interesting aspect of the near-death experience, is that they at least state over 50% of the time that they make a conscious decision to return to their bodies. And others, 25% of the time, say they were told to come back. One boy was told me that he was told, "Go back, Bobby, you have a job to do." So in the great majority of cases, these critically ill patients felt they were either told or decided to return to their body. Now, I want you to think about who these patients are. These patients are real-life flatliners. They are people who only have 1 in 1,000 chance of living, given their medical circumstances. And it's kind of interesting, why them? You know, why them out of the 999 others who are in similar circumstances who go on to die? And yet when they come back, they say to us, oh yes, I was told to come back, or I was told it wasn't my time yet, or I was told I had to hug my mother, or I had to be with my family.
When you look at all of these different case studies, are there qualities that make the people who have these experiences more like each other than the general population? Do they share certain qualities, certain characteristics?
In my own study of children, I have not found that to be the case. When I study these children, they seem to be just like any child to me. When we do psychological profiles on them and get their past medical histories and such as that, we find them just to be average, normal American children. Specifically, they are not from greater religious backgrounds. You know, they're not all born-again Christians or deeply devout religious families. They don't seem to have any tendency towards fantasy, or they're not children who are prone to making up unusual stories. They really just seem like your normal, average American kids. But I'm aware that some people have studied near-death experiences in adults and have said that these adults are fantasy-prone individuals. I'll just have to say that in my experience of studying children, that has not been the case.
Now, when you tell these stories, relate them to your colleagues at the University of Washington or your colleagues in the medical community at large, what's the reaction? Do they believe you?
Well, of course they believe me, because our study was so well done. We spent several years just designing the scientific underpinnings of our study of near-death experiences. And before I wrote my book, I published 3 articles in the American Medical Association's pediatric journal. So obviously, you know, to get that kind of mainstream acceptance for this kind of a wacky topic, you know, we really had to, you know, earn the respect of our medical colleagues. But on the other hand, you know, obviously, this is an unusual topic. People whistle the theme song to the Twilight Zone when they see me coming sometimes, and you know, we have created some controversy. You know, it's about death. And even though hospitals are where most Americans die nowadays, the subject of death is the last American taboo. Children, listen to this. This is, you know, to really put this in light. Children have said to me things like, Dr. Morse, don't tell my parents I'm going to die. And this is a child who we hadn't even told was going to die. I mean, they, you know, we think we're hiding, you know, the facts of life or of death from these children. But, you know, when they have a near-fatal disease such as cancer, very often they themselves know when they're going to die. And so why would a child say that? Don't tell my parents. It's because
they want to protect them.
Exactly. And they know that talking about death and their impending death is something that just is very upsetting to people. When a fatal diagnosis is made, when we all know, you know, as doctors and nurses, that someone is going to die, time motion studies have documented that doctors, nurses, and family members spend less time at the bedside. So obviously, when we come in with our research and we say, wait a minute, dying people are not just kind of quietly checking out into oblivion, but they're having a wonderful spiritual experience, then we're assaulting the very taboos that we have built up around death in our society. And of course, like any good research, our research has been very controversial.